Good evening, what's happening, Shalom? Welcome to this episode here of the Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, and we are coming at you not so live, actually, because quite frankly, the quality of my live videos is terrible, so I'd rather just pre-record these and post them on YouTube instead of dealing with the live Facebook stuff. Plus, that started when we were trying to do these every single weekday, and whilst that certainly is going to be the end goal, that's not what we're doing now, right? We want to make sure we're consistently doing it at least once a week before we're actually biting off more than we can actually chew. So thank you guys for tuning in. Welcome to this episode here of the Watchdog. And again, I am your host, CJ Cox. We have quite a bit of interesting news in my own opinion. We're going to be talking primarily about Virginia, but there is quite a bit of other things we'll be discussing as well. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into what we have on the screen right now, because this is actually going to be our first topic. It is, a topic that I find both hilarious and disturbing, and that is Cardi B teasing a possible run for Congress. Now, before we get into it, I need to explain what I mean. So, one of the reasons why I find it to be hilarious, right, if we're going to go on that end, and I'm not even trying to be dismissive or rude, but it's just that quite frankly, Cardi B is the last person who should be getting involved in anything serious at any point in time. She's a walking joke, the epitome of what it means to be a joke, right? I mean, she has no lyrical talent whatsoever. She probably doesn't even write her own music. She's got a completely made-up persona. She got signed onto her, whatever her record label is, because she was basically a prostitute on Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that. Now, granted, I know that it was a stripper, but let's be perfectly frank. There's little to no difference between a prostitute and a stripper. So, just being straight up with it. And that somehow qualified her to be a rap artist, which I guess qualified her to get into acting. And now, apparently, that qualifies her to want to seek a membership in Congress. And I just think the whole thing is hilarious. It kind of proves not only that our entertainment industry has become a joke, but that our media in general has become a joke, and that our politics have become a joke. I used to, talk with my friends. We'd talk about the 2003 recall election in California, and I would point out how, when you have Arnold Schwarzenegger and Mary Carey, right, and Larry Flint, and Gary Coleman, right, and etc. And these are your candidates. These are the people who are actually actively seeking the office, right? It kind of makes nobody take you serious. And in the end, that has kind of happened. California since then, not that California was a, utopian society beforehand, but since then, I mean, California politics have literally become a joke. There's virtually no standard. Something real similar, I think, happened in 2016 when all of a sudden we started taking the words of celebrity seriously. The left had virtually nothing but celebrities at the DNC. LeBron James, Katy Perry, etc. And a whole bunch of them were saying they would run in 2020. Kanye said he'd run in 2020. Trump, of course, is a celebrity himself. And, and as a result, you're seeing now the 2020 election is basically a reality television show. It's a joke. It's nothing more than a joke. But it's a very dangerous joke, right? And this is why I get to the other end here of why this is also a deeply disturbing topic. This joke has consequences. Donald Trump makes actual laws. He has actual decisions. He's the real executive of an actual nation. And it just so happens to be the most powerful nation in the actual world, right? None of this is actually fiction. It's all real. And hypothetically, Cardi B could actually sit in Congress in reality, right? That's something that could certainly happen. She definitely has the support, right? I mean, she's somebody who's internationally known. Probably has millions of fans in the United States alone. You think she couldn't get something like a Congress position? Of course she could. Of course she could. And by the way, she actually has pretty, I won't say well thought out by any stretch of the imagination because I find them ridiculous, but she knows what she believes politically. She does actually, she's basically a Sandersite, if you want to just, kind of wrap it up in one nice little word. She's pro-free healthcare, wants us to fight the climate change that is inevitable, allegedly, wants to have gun control. She's real big on things like, forgiving student loan debt, right? And et cetera, right? So it's not like she is somebody who's never thought about these particular topics before, as tends to be the case when people want to run for office. I know a lot of times where we immediately hear, oh, Kanye West, Katy Perry want to run for office. Ha, 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 that's real funny. But in reality, you don't claim that you want to run for office or even go out of your way to legitimately seek that office unless you have at least somewhat of an idea of what you want. Maybe not what you're talking about, but at least what you want to accomplish, in your political career. I think that if we were to have people like Cardi B in Congress and in the presidency and in our different governorships and etc., which is to an extent already happening with Donald Trump and with Katie Hill and with Arnold Schwarzenegger and etc., right? You're going to start to run into a very serious problem, and that is, number one, these people don't have any morals. Number two, these people don't have any idea what they're talking about when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, right? And just was talking about her. She's a socialist, right? She's a socialist, and she's also a quote-unquote bad bitch, excuse my language, right? Now, I don't know necessarily if that gangster mentality would translate into actual political coercion against enemies, but I don't see any reason to believe why it wouldn't, considering her socialist ideologies. She's certainly not somebody who's controlled in her personal life. Now, you may be throwing out, yeah, but what about Donald Trump? Well, I don't like Donald Trump, so I don't understand why you would be bringing that up here. Donald Trump is somebody who I trust about as far as I could throw him, and he's pretty fat. You know what I'm saying? So this whole thing is just, it's real bad. It's real bad. And the thing about celebrities that's even worse than all of this is they do have the support. On top of the fact that they are, completely brain dead and amoral, they do have the support. These guys are supported, or girls are supported by millions and millions and millions of Americans, sometimes even people outside of the country. And there's a certain spiritual element to it, too. I would just like to point out, right, somebody who's believed in the eyes of the American populace to be very sexually attractive, who does not actually care about modesty whatsoever. In fact, there's going to be a little bit of a warning here. Cardi B does not dress in any way that is even remotely reasonable. So if you're actually watching this, be prepared in this article when I go down to see little glimpses of things you probably don't want to see. It's not outright nudity, but nonetheless, back to the point, right? There's a certain spiritual element of that, in that, right? And the certain spiritual element in the promotion of violence that she has and the promotion of greed that she has and all those sorts of things, right? And I would argue that if indeed she was elected, that says a lot about where we are spiritually as a nation. Although I would argue the same actually about the fact that we have Donald Trump as president. We're legitimately considering people like Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris. Although, thank God Kamala Harris is actually out of the race. Nonetheless, I hope you can see why I find all these things to be dangerous. But let's go ahead and read, because there's actual things to be said here, right? Cardi B didn't just claim that she wants to be, I might run for Congress one day. Let's see what happens, right? Something like that. There was actual thought placed into this, right? She actually has a few opinions, like I was saying, that she has thought out. I don't agree with them. I don't think that they are thought out in well, in the sense that I don't think they would work. I think they would result in the deaths of millions, bankrupt the country, things of that nature, right? She's pretty much a typical socialist leftist. However, she does have things to say. So let's look at those things to say. Yesterday on Twitter, Cardi announced her desire to run for office, saying, "I think I want to be a politician." And this was all done through Twitter. Here it says, I am Cardi B's Twitter, and it's, I want to be a politician. I really love government, even though I don't agree with government. Now, what she means there is obviously that she doesn't agree with our current government. Not agreeing with government would be anarchism. She doesn't have any sort of anarchist inklings in her, unless it's something along the lines of anarcho-communism. But even then, I would argue, not really. So let's go ahead and read some of the other stuff that we have here. Cardi said she became interested in running for office after watching war documentaries and possibly subtweeted Trump for how he's handled the situation in Iran. Now, I obviously am going to read the quote here from Cardi on her own Twitter, but isn't that interesting that that's the extent of anything she's ever done? I'm not saying documentaries are bad, right? But, here we have a massive scholastic system or the entire internet or a system filled with tons and tons and tons of contemporaries and even people who are, you know, higher up in the academic echelons, right, who do know about these things, but a few war documentaries, and all of a sudden you're qualified. I don't know. I just find it interesting. What she says is, like, I was watching war documentaries. No matter how many weapons a country have, you need people. How are you trying to go against the country and possibly start a war when this country lacks patriotism? I barely see people claiming they love being American. Now, of course, that's a very interesting thing for her to point out, because it's actually because of people like her that we have this problem. What do I mean by that? Well, it is progressives, socialists, leftists, people of that nature, who go out of their way to, well, America is built on nothing but evil, it's total racism and hatred and misogyny, and it's patriarchy and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. We need to get rid of the flag and tear down all the, you know, statues to founders and all that other kind of stuff, which, by the way, I don't even necessarily agree with statues. I think it's kind of idolatry, but nonetheless, you see the idea, right? But it's certainly not the people on the right. In fact, I'm fairly certain that that's one of the litmus tests of being on the right, is that you're patriotic, and in some cases even nationalistic. So if this is a dig at any sort of war hawkery, it's not a very well thought out one, in my opinion. Now, that being said, I don't agree with war hawkery by any stretch of the imagination. Realistically speaking, I don't know if the whole altercation with Iran is necessarily worth it. I know we're currently in talks with Iran again on the Iran nuclear deal, and that's lovely. I mean, it kind of just seems like Donald Trump is just doing everything that Obama was already doing, but whatever. It's just my opinion, I guess. We're going to continue. Cardi then teased that there would be more to come from her on this topic soon. I will have to explain a lot, so I will have to do a video or a live talking about it. So I'm going to come back to my last 2 tweets another day. I'm going to talk about it another day. Then she says, I do feel like if I go back to school and focus up, I can be part of Congress. Deadass, I have so much ideas that make sense. I just need a couple of years of school and I can shake the table. So just, obviously this was something that was continued on by her more and more. Her tweet teasing a congressional run has gone viral, amassing 160,000 likes in less than 24 hours. Lots of people are into the idea of Representative Cardi B. And by the way, just to point out, this is not the first time that she's had any sort of a political altercation specifically on Twitter. She's been known to go back and forth with Tomi Lahren. In fact, the most interesting conversation is when Tomi Lahren pointed out the hypocrisy of being in a Me Too world, right, where we're criticizing everybody for sexualizing women, and yet here's Cardi B, allegedly a feminist icon of not only the left but of America in general, and she has a music video with I don't know how many people, but it's just twerking and twerking and twerking and, you know, half naked women and all this other kind of stuff, which is just outright degeneracy, if I may be perfectly frank, right? I'm sorry, but sexuality should be kept, regardless of what kind of sexuality it is, should be kept within the confines of your own home with the person who you deeply care for. I don't agree with homosexual marriage or anything like that, but I'm just going to leave it at what I just said previously, at least for now, because that's not the topic. But nonetheless, right, if you're into all that kind of sexual stuff, do it at home with your spouse, right? You don't have to be a degenerate and put it all out there for everybody to see. That's how we get this hyper-sexualized, hyper-objectified culture where both women and men outright, as we can see by the fact that you're all sitting up in this music video twerking, objectify women. And even objectify men, by the way, because quite frankly, a lot of men are their worth is almost established by how much of a player that they can be, right? Which is kind of ridiculous, all things considered, because a player is a terrible person, right? A player is a womanizer, is somebody who shatters hearts, who leaves kids with moms who have to now raise them by themselves at the age of 16, 17, or is potentially a deadbeat dad, or is potentially even in prison or things like that. Those are the kinds of people that womanizers are, right? So it's not like it's a good glorification on any end. And it actually says it's not the first time that Cardi B has gotten political on social media. Last year, she released a viral video slamming Trump's government shutdown, which, of course, was hysterical. And when people tried to come for Cardi saying she wasn't intelligent enough to delve into politics, which is 100% accurate, her own high school teacher weighing in, letting the haters know that actually Cardi is damn smart, which that's perfectly fine. He can say that, but we have eyes. We can watch this woman speak. But anyway, what he did say, for those of you on my feed who were trashing Cardi B for representing a political voice, A, she probably scored higher than you on U.S. History Regents exams and was in my AP government class. Okay, so a few things here. Number one, being in an AP government class doesn't really mean anything. A lot of people were in an AP government class. Number two, I call baloney. Sorry, I was going to say bologna, but kind of mixed with baloney. Anyways, I just don't think that that's true. I'm sorry. Like I said, I have eyes, I have ears. I can listen to this person speak. She barely knows proper English, for crying out loud. Like, I mean, have you ever seen the Pepsi commercial? If you don't know what to get them, don't get them a sweater. You know what I mean? It's like she's the dumbest broad I've ever had the misfortune of listening to in my entire life. And I have listened to quite a few AOC speeches. Let me be perfectly clear. I probably shouldn't use the word broad. That's probably not particularly nice. But I'm just saying, she's not an intelligent person by any stretch. You're not nearly as busy as her, and what have you done to advance political discourse in this country? In the case of a lot of her critics, quite a bit. In fact, that's basically Tommy Lorraine's entire job. That's basically what I'm trying to get accomplished as my entire job. So, what exactly are you talking about? Also, I'd be interested to know whether or not Cardi B votes, because I have a sneaking suspicion the answer is no. She may have voted in 2016 because a lot of people panicked and therefore voted in 2016, but before then, I just highly doubt that. I highly doubt that she gives money to political to political causes. Gives political contributions is what I was meaning to say, right? I highly doubt that she's a charitable giver. If I'm wrong about this, go ahead and let me know. But nonetheless, she has a national platform and is using it to speak about things that are important. Why can't we respect that? And then SDFU and take a seat. Now, it's interesting. I would like to know Joan Hill and also Cardi B's opinions on this as it pertains to Kanye West and Donald Trump, who they disagree with. Because remember, he was completely unqualified, and therefore we couldn't trust him or anything like that. But apparently, according to Joan Hill, who's someone that I guess is important for some reason, Cardi B had high scores on a history test, and therefore she should have the ability to be going out and speaking politically. That's just interesting in my opinion. Very hypocritical. Nonetheless, though, we're almost done with this woeful topic. No, we are done on this woeful topic. I thought that actually they would go and discuss some of the other things that she was talking about. So she got in a conversation after this about gun control, where essentially that she was saying that we should expand gun control to include bans on having any sort of firearm whatsoever before the age of 21, and she was actually justifying it with the alcohol age and the cigarette age, which isn't that hilarious? It's almost like every conservative ever on the entire planet has been suggesting that that would be the case, because once you start infantilizing the entire youth, right, saying, oh, you can't make this decision, you can't make that decision, you can't make that decision, well, eventually actual legitimate rights are going to be taken away from you. Can you represent yourself in court, right? Do you have the right to be emancipated on your own? In this particular case, do you have a right to bear a firearm, and etc.? We all are perfectly aware of the fact that school is compulsory. We're also perfectly aware of the fact that you do not have rights in school, right? Anybody who's actually gone to school knows you can't bring a weapon onto school. There's no such thing as no quarter in school. There's no such thing as a trial in school. You don't have freedom of speech in school. You don't have freedom of, religious practice in school. There's tons of things not specifically mentioned in the Constitution that you as a person do not retain the right to, which is a violation of the 9th and 10th Amendments, right? So clearly they force you to get into the school, they then just suspend all of your rights, right? And then here you are in a federal building with the federal government telling you what you can and cannot do. I mean, how did they get away with that? Because you're children. Well, how are they going to get away with all this? Well, because you're children. You don't have the ability, right? What happens when they raise the age of consent to 21? That's going to be real awkward, isn't it? I was married before 21. What happens when they raise the age to join the military to 21? What happens if they potentially raise the age to vote? or run for any sort of political office to 21. I mean, what's to stop them, right? Maybe the adult age in general should just be 21. Although I guess with some people it's, no, really we should have like a smoking age of like 25, but like 14 to vote. And obviously I'm exaggerating, but you know, there is a bunch of people who don't think this through at all. Nonetheless, this is an important article, but this is actually not what I want to talk about next. I've said all I need to in this particular case. The basics are, I think this is incredibly dangerous. I think it's hilarious that we're actually taking these people seriously. But I also think that it is incredibly dangerous because we are taking these people seriously. Cardi B could definitely be somebody who runs for Congress, potentially even somebody who runs for president. I think she's 27 at the moment, if I'm not mistaken. That would leave her open to run in 2028. Hypothetically speaking, she gets elected to Congress in 2022, 2024. She already has political experience going in. And she's got a whole bunch of support, right? And she's quite literally a witch, right? She's like Jezebel incarnate. And, by the way, just so happens to be a member of the Roman Catholic Church. I'm going to leave that there, but whatever. I don't know. It's not good. It's not good. And even if it's not Cardi, right, it's going to be someone else. It's going to be Kanye or potentially even somebody who is a political celebrity like AOC, right? It's going to be someone. There's going to be someone who we are going to elect who is just going to be the point of no return. To a certain extent, Donald Trump really already was, because the election of Donald Trump guarantees that this completely unqualified and amoral tyrant of the hypothetical future will be elected. It's really just a question of who is that hypothetical tyrant that Trump's election has essentially made inevitable. Right, when we have this idea of taking these people seriously, of completely ignoring somebody's moral history, of completely ignoring the things that people actually say for our own political gain and power. And by the way, let's also point out, too, there is a certain thing to be said about qualification. There is a certain thing to be said about qualification, for sure. I'm not saying that you have to be, and to a certain extent, I guess Trump is a businessman, so that does count a little bit. But bare minimum, something. Whether it's politics, maybe it's military, maybe you're a lawyer. But this idea, I'm just going to go from stripper to rap artist to congresswoman, I mean, that's insane. That doesn't make any sense. Of course, it's legal. I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't be. But it doesn't make any sense. And anyways, I don't know. I'm just babbling on. Let's go ahead and move forward. There's a bunch of Virginia stuff to talk about. So, this is slightly old in the sense that it's probably like a week old at this point. But 4 gun control bills move forward in Virginia. Richmond, Virginia, proposals for stricter gun laws quickly move forward in the Virginia legislature on Monday, which of course was yesterday. It'd actually be 2 days ago from the perspective of you guys if you're watching this the day it's posted, because this won't be posted until tomorrow. But I'm recording this on Tuesday. Nonetheless, the Democratic-led Senate Judiciary Committee sent 4 gun control bills to the Senate floor. They include a limit of 1 handgun purchase per month, expanded background checks to include private sales, the ability for localities to ban guns in public spaces, including government buildings, and a red flag law, which gives law enforcement officers the ability to seize guns from people determined to be at risk of hurting themselves or others. All right, so let's go ahead and check out the problems here. A limit of 1 handgun purchase per month shall not be infringed. So we literally can just move on from that. But let's also just go ahead and point out, because a whole bunch of people are going to say, well, why do you need more than 1 handgun per month? Well, maybe because you're telling me I shouldn't. To be perfectly frank, I think that that is a legitimate reason for me to stockpile weapons. In fact, I could not think of a more legitimate reason for anybody to stockpile weapons, including a government. Right? The idea that somebody may want to violate my rights, potentially attack me afterwards, is reason enough for me to have thousands of handguns, quite frankly. So, you know, there shouldn't be any limit. Like I said, shall not be infringed. Expanded background checks to include private sales. The government should not be, let me say this very bluntly, the government should not be regulating commerce. It is not their job. It is not their job. Show me any place in the Constitution that says that the government is supposed to be doing anything along the lines of setting prices or creating rules for any market. Any market, right? It's not the government's job. Now you're going to say, okay, the Constitution is for federal government. That's true. That's true, but the Constitution is also the basis, right? It's the, what's the word I'm looking for there? The prototype, right? For what the state constitutions are supposed to base themselves on. For what they're supposed to be, rather. The ability for localities to ban guns in public spaces, including government buildings. Quite frankly, that is just outright illegal, according to the United States Constitution. You do not have that right. I, as a sovereign citizen of this country, have the right to carry a firearm wherever I so please, unless there is an individual who owns this property and has decided that on his private property I am not allowed to do so. This is why people like Starbucks and things like that can actually get away with banning guns in their particular shops, right? But banning guns in public spaces, and they say including government buildings, first off, I find that to be completely ridiculous, right? Government buildings, everybody else is armed, why can't I be? All you guys are. But on top of that, what do you mean by public spaces? Public spaces can be quite a bit of things, actually. Parks are public spaces. Are you going to ban guns at parks? Walking down the sidewalk is technically public places. Are you going to ban me having guns while I'm walking about on the sidewalk? Am I not allowed to concealed carry, period? Right? What do you mean by public spaces? And of course, they haven't properly defined that yet, because once they give you the right to ban guns in public spaces, then they can define what public spaces are. And the law already exists allowing them to ban these guns in those public spaces. So once they decide what those public spaces are, guess what? You don't get to keep your firearm there. That's how it works. That's exactly how it works. A red flag law, which gives law enforcement officers the ability to seize guns from people determined to be at risk of hurting themselves or others. The red flag laws are a violation of so many different amendments, it's honestly kind of mind-numbing. They are a violation of Amendments 4 through 6, violation of Amendment 2. You could argue, considering the militarization of police, that it could be an argument of no quarter Amendment 3, but I wouldn't. I just find it to be funny. Nonetheless, right, this is certainly trial without jury, trial without, actually, it's not even really trial, really, right? They're just going out and deciding this is going to be the case. But, they probably will end up making the same excuse that they did with the federal government being able to spy on you with FISA warrants, right? The fact of the matter is the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution makes perfectly clear you must specifically state what is to be seized, when, and why. Why has to be a legitimate and reasonable cause. The word probable cause is actually what is used. So it needs to be something that a judge orders, okay? It needs to specifically state what is being taken, what is being searched, why it's being searched, and give some sort of a legal justification for said searching or confiscation. That's what the Fourth Amendment says. The Fifth Amendment makes perfectly clear, as does the Sixth, that you are to receive a trial. A trial that allows you to representation, a trial that is amongst your peers, a trial that is public and speedy and without unreasonable punishments, right? Cruel or unusual punishment is the way that it puts it. These are the rules. And, by the way, the obvious one, the Second Amendment. My right to have a firearm shall not be infringed. Period. Period. There is absolutely no getting around that. Quite frankly, anybody trying to get around that is declaring war, actual war, on the citizenry that they are claiming to represent. And I by no means condemn anybody who responds in self-defense, because that is, quite frankly, what our founders did. If somebody is coming to your home under a red flag law to take your firearms, then you have every right to use deadly force to defend yourself. And every single one of the founders would agree. And quite frankly, according to Augustine's just war theory, as the aggressor, you're in the moral wrong there. So not only do the moral philosophers agree and the constitutional people agree, but even the people from back in the day in the church making the just war theory would also agree. Not that I agree with everything Augustine of Hippo, or even most of the things that Augustine of Hippo said, but nonetheless, that's neither here nor there. We're on a political show right now. There were passionate comments from dozens of gun rights supporters in the committee meeting and a press conference held by NRA members near the Capitol. And of course, the NRA members capitulated. They said that they were looking, to reach a compromise with that dirtbag Northam, the governor of Virginia. He, of course, is famous for such absolutely hellacious and disgusting words as, if a baby survives a botched abortion, then we'll have a conversation with the mother and the doctor and determine where to go from there, which is almost a direct quote. I might be paraphrasing slightly only because my memory fails me occasionally, but that's almost a direct quote. And of course, this is the same guy who wants to spearhead the violation of your rights, right? That's completely reasonable. Interestingly enough, he also has quite a history of racism, by which I do not actually mean the blackface, because I don't actually think blackface is racist, but he was also caught being in blackface, so there's that. Nonetheless, the NRA decided that they wanted to actually capitulate and reach some sort of a compromise with this dirtbag. And quite frankly, I don't think you should support the NRA under any circumstances, because they are nothing more than another one of these political gangs like the Republicans and DemoCRIPS. They're interested in their own personal agenda, and their personal agenda is power and money. It is not the preservation of your liberties, right? And I'm sorry, but all these other organizations who are coming up, they might be good now, but eventually they will be the same. It is incumbent on the individual, not parties, not political action committees. It is incumbent on the individual to use his political voice or her political voice to keep himself or herself free. You need to vote, and you need to vote for the people who are going to protect your liberties. And when they don't protect your liberties, as most of them will inevitably end up doing because power corrupts, you need to vote them out, right? You need to stay informed. You need to know what's actually going on in your political structure. You need to know what your rights are. Have you read the Constitution? And by read the Constitution, I don't mean can you quote the preamble from that one song you sung in 4th grade, which, by the way, leaves some things out in order to make it flow better, just for the record. Do you actually know your rights? Have you ever seen the Declaration of Independence before? Not the real thing, obviously. That's not what I'm saying. But have you ever, you got a phone, read it, look over it. What does it say? Some very interesting words on those pages there. But these guys want to capitulate. Now, what does a compromise look like in this particular dispute here? In my opinion, there is only one compromise, and that is Northam compromising to absolutely every single one of the Second Amendment supporters' demands, without any exception. Unconditional surrender on the part of the communists. That is the only quote-unquote compromise. Okay? You cannot have any of these laws. It's illegal. And also, quite frankly, when President Trump sees this man outright violating the Constitution, it is his job as the executive to remove him from office. Yes, as the United States federal government, one of your jobs, according to the original Constitution, is to protect the liberties that are enshrined in that Constitution. If Governor Northam decides that he is going to start violating the 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments, it is your duty as the executive, as the commander-in-chief, to remove him from office, and if it has to be forcible, then so be it. Then this is just the facts, my friends. In pushing for the bill, DemoCRIPS and gun control advocates said it set a higher bar for the evidence needed for officers to get a search warrant. That's hilarious. Language includes a requirement of clear and convincing evidence. They said the measure will help prevent suicides and other shootings. On average, one Virginia resident dies by gun suicide every 14 hours, said one Moms Demand Action member. I don't know what you expect me to do about that. I mean, quite frankly, you don't have, I don't know, the whole, stopping suicide with some sort of a law thing has always been, mind-blowingly retarded to me. And I don't mean to be so blunt and rude, but, really? You're going to somehow try, you're going to use the government to stop somebody who wants to kill themselves from killing themselves. You can't remove somebody from themselves, right? You can't change somebody's mind with government coercion and force. So, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. Anyways, Also, to be perfectly frank, I don't believe you should commit suicide. Let me be perfectly clear about that. And I actually find it to be a sort of a, I wouldn't say a sin by any stretch, because the Bible doesn't say that, but it is, I don't think it's your right to take. But from a strictly secular standpoint, nobody has a right to take your life more than you. So that's just something that needs to be noted there also. Gun rights supporters fired back, speaking directly to lawmakers, arguing that it's unlawful for officers to be able to search a house without an accusation of a crime, which is correct, as well as clear and reasonable evidence that the crime has been committed, right? Not just an accusation, and a warrant specifically looking for whatever was used to commit the crime, or for a specific amount of evidence, like DNA evidence or a gun or something like that, right? In other words, there has to be specificity. It has to say, this is the crime he's alleged of committing. This is the evidence that is supporting the crime, supporting that he committed this crime, right? And this is what specifically we're searching for, when, why, and what we're looking for. That is what the Fourth Amendment says. Read it for yourself. In fact, you know what? Let's just pull it up. Let's see here. Constitution. United States Constitution. Right. The Bill of Rights. Amendment 4. Search and seizure. Quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Let me say that last part again. And particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. You need specificity. Let me also go up here to the original part here where it said no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath and affirmation, or affirmation rather. That is what it says. That is the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. If you can somehow make an argument that this is not actually a violation of that, then you definitely have a reading comprehension problem. Let's go ahead and read Amendment number 5 as well. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, right? So in other words, you need to actually have a trial before anyone is accusing you of it, or before you having to answer, rather, to any accusation of a crime, right? Unless you're in the military. Then in actual service, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived, listen to this now, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property. Guns fit into both of those categories. Nor be deprived of life, liberty, your freedom, it is in there in the Second Amendment, it is your right, or property, it belongs to you, without due process of law. What did it just describe as due process of law? Trial by jury of your peers. So here we see a violation of that as well. Let's go ahead and finish it. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Last one I want to read here, Amendment number 6. We already know how it violates Amendment number 2. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. Speedy and public. By an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature of the accusation, nature and cause of the accusation. To be confronted with the witnesses. You don't get to report this anonymously. Okay? Against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witness in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel. You are entitled to a lawyer. That is a violation of the Sixth Amendment as well. Red flag laws, quite frankly, are evil. They are disgusting. They are violations of 4 different amendments in the original 10, and anybody who passes them should be forcibly removed by the federal executive, because it is your job to defend the liberty of the United States people. It is your job. Anyways, this kind of falls under I hate gun owners, this whole group of bills really, one gun rights supporter said. They believe it takes away due process and violates privacy. Quote, I oppose this bill. It's straight up gun confiscation. It is unconstitutional and we will not stand for it, end quote, a Lynchburg resident said before smacking the table in front of him. Virginians shared personal stories to show why they think these new gun laws would hurt their ability to protect themselves. Sorry, just one moment. A Franklin County man argued that the lawmakers should not further restrict access to certain weapons. Quote, I want to make sure my wife and my sister are able to protect themselves by whatever means necessary, end quote. And I agree, said Andrew Whitting in a statement that drew applause from some of the crowd. A Virginia woman shared a story of the day that changed her life forever. She said if she hadn't been in a gun-free zone, if she hadn't been in a gun-free zone when she was raped, she would have had a gun, which could have prevented the rape. Exactly correct. And you know who is responsible for that? You know who is responsible for that? Every single lawmaker and voter who voted yes. That is on your head. This woman's rape is on your head, and you are just as guilty as the rapist, which quite frankly, in my opinion, is a death penalty. I'm not saying anybody should kill you. What I am saying is from a moral standpoint, you have a death penalty on your head. And God help you if you don't repent for it. Quote, making it harder and more expensive for me to defend myself is not common sense, end quote, said Savannah Lindquist, drawing more applause from the audience. DemoCRIPS have showed signs of not being fully united behind the push for each new gun law. Senator Joe Morrissey, who represents Chesterfield County, expressed some concern over the red flag law. Quote, it needs some work, Morrissey said, end quote. Though he did not vote to move the bill forward to the Senate, or though he did rather vote to move the bill forward to the Senate floor. And of course he did, because he's a slimy politician. He's going to go ahead and capitulate to whatever his gang says, regardless of whether or not his principals disagree with it. In fact, votes for each measure in the Senate committee were along party lines Monday. The actions Monday showed which specifics would be included in bills moving forward. For instance, the bill to expand background checks would make an infraction a Class 1 misdemeanor. Others deemed the punishment a felony. I hate this thing. There we go. The bill to allow localities to ban guns in public spaces includes government buildings in areas like parks. What do you know? It's almost like that's exactly what I was saying earlier. Leaders in the city of Roanoke have pushed for expanded measures like this. And once again, on their heads is every mugging, is every rape, is every kidnapping, is every murder that is ever going to occur that could have been prevented by somebody carrying their lawfully owned firearm. And once again, for most of those crimes, the penalty is death. And I am not saying that we should go out and kill them. That is not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is, if we're just talking about this philosophically from the moral standpoint, you are guilty. And the wages of this guilt are death. And that's between you and God, right? Like I said, I'm not going to advocate for some sort of a violence or anything like that. It's ridiculous. Let's see. The bill's movement shows that DemoCRIPS are serious about moving quickly on gun issues, something they promised to do when they won control of both houses of the legislature in November. There are more than 40 gun control bills filed in the General Assembly, and this was written by Tommy Lopez. All right, so, once again, if somebody comes to your home with the intention of taking your lawfully owned firearms in violation of the 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments, you have every right to respond with deadly force. And quite frankly, that is what Virginia is asking for at this current point in time. And, you know, a lot of people have said that to a certain extent this is a test for the United States, and I would agree. This is a test for the United States. It's a test for how far will we let the state governments and federal government violate our liberties. How ungovernable will we be as a result of them attempting to violate our liberties? I do not advocate any form of violence in the sense that I think all violence is evil. Unfortunately, Necessary evils exist in our fallen world. And whilst it should never, ever be on the option to strike first, it is a declaration of war on the people of Virginia to have armed men take their lawfully owned firearms and violate their Second, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment liberties. And again, the vast majority of moral philosophers, the vast majority of the church's philosophers, by church I mean the church spiritual, not any sort of physical church, and every single one of the founders would have agreed with that. Quite frankly, if you don't agree with that, then I'd seriously question your own personal sanity and morals. This is very problematic, to say the least. And of course, we saw this dirtbag, this scum, this disgusting waste of flesh and oxygen, declare state of emergency ahead of the gun rights rally, which of course ended up going past peacefully for a couple of reasons. Number one, because conservatives don't tend to be the violent type, and number two, because, I mean, it really is the government going to try and oppress these people when they're all fully armed? Of course not! And that's the reason we have the Second Amendment. But nonetheless, he called a state of emergency ahead of the gun rights rally. Fearing potential violence, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam is declaring a state of emergency and is banning firearms and other weapons on the Capitol grounds in Richmond ahead of a gun rights demonstration planned for next week. Let me be perfectly clear. That should cause the amount of people who plan on being on the Capitol grounds armed exponentially increase. Any politician tells you that I am not going to allow you to brandish your weapons here on these Capitol grounds because I don't like the fact that you're protesting for your liberties, then you get yourself a bigger gun, a little bit more bullets, and a few more friends. And dare them to remove you. And once again, do not respond with violence. Do not strike first. That is not the moral way to go about things. If you want to hold actual, legitimate moral high ground, then you need to actually, unfortunately, sit there and wait for yourself to be attacked. But also, if they are going to outright tell you, hey, we're going to attack you, get real in their face and dare them to. If you're really feeling froggish, leap, as Eminem used to say. Quote, we have received credible intelligence from our law enforcement agencies that there are groups with malicious plans for the rally that is planned for Monday. End quote. Northam said during a press conference Wednesday afternoon. That was a lie. If it wasn't a lie, demand that he show you that intelligence. Because quite frankly, I don't believe him. I think he manufactured that so that he could try and get his little political stunt pushed forward. That's what I think happened there. Gun rights supporters are preparing to converge on Richmond for a lobbying day and a rally Monday morning. They're opposed to efforts by Virginia lawmakers who've just taken over control of the Virginia legislature following the November 2019 elections to pass a slate of gun control bills backed by Northam. The event, hosted by Virginia Citizens Defense League, is expected to draw thousands of armed protesters, some from out of state. Organizers have said they hope to hold a peaceful event. But Northam said officials have heard reports of out-of-state militia groups and hate groups planning to travel from across the country to disrupt our democratic process with acts of violence. He said they are coming to intimidate and cause harm. Where's the evidence? I want to see it. Seriously, if he's going to actually declare something like a state of emergency, if he's going to start having violations of people's rights, saying you can't have a firearm here, then show me the evidence. Unless you're a coward, which of course I know you are, Northam. But nonetheless, we continue. Northam is raising concerns about a reprise of the deadly violence surrounding the white supremacist march in Charlottesville in August 2017, which, of course, was not a white supremacist march. There were white supremacists there, but it was not a white supremacist march. That is incorrect. NPR is lying. Quite frankly, members of the Proud Boys and James O'Keefe and others should be suing them for every penny they have. He said state intelligence analysts have identified threats and rhetoric online that mirror the chatter they were picking up around that time. Show me the evidence. Please know, quote, please know that we have been preparing extensively to protect public safety at Monday's rally, but no one wants another incident like the one we saw at Charlottesville in 2017, end quote, Northam said. Monday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. On a Facebook page organizing the gun rights demonstration hosted by the Virginia Citizen Defense League, several commenters expressed frustration at Northam's move to restrict guns from the Capitol grounds. One wrote, quote, this is simply a move to infringe on not only our Second Amendment rights, but our First Amendment rights as well, by which he meant the right to protest, the right to assemble is the way that's actually put in the Constitution, and he is exactly right. Northam asked organizers of the event to disavow any groups who would threaten violence. And quite frankly, everybody should refuse. For 3 reasons. Number 1, unless you have proven that there are legitimate threats of terrorist-like violence, then there is nothing for them to disavow, and this is nothing more than a political stunt. Nobody should fall for it. Number 2, if there are people who are threatening violence, by which they actually mean, if you attack us, we will attack back, such violence should not be disavowed, but in fact should be fully supported. Number 3, you first, buddy. You first. I want to see you guarantee that you will not use force to enact these laws. And if that is not the case, sorry, then you shouldn't expect that from anyone else. And by the way, let's just go ahead and take a wee little look here, shall we? To see what exactly has happened in Virginia recently. Got 9 minutes left. So we're not going to read these, but these are some things that I just didn't get on here. Virginia gun rights activists have vowed that their fight is just getting started. Virginia Senate has voted to eliminate Lee Jackson Day. Which, whatever, right? We're just going to completely erase history. Doesn't matter. Let's see. Virginia Senate advances red flag law, gun law. Yep. So the red flag law did actually pass. The Virginia Senate, I'll actually put this in the description, but you can't see it on the screen here. I'm reading it off my phone because I wanted to pick up what's actually currently going on. The Virginia Senate has advanced legislation that would allow authorities to take guns away from people deemed dangerous to themselves or others. The Democratic-led Senate gave preliminary approval to approve the so-called red flag law. SB 240 would create a process for attorneys and law enforcement to file emergency orders prohibiting a person from purchasing, possessing, or transferring a firearm if they pose a substantial risk of injury to himself or others. This move comes a day after tens of thousands of gun rights activists rallied peacefully at the state capitol. Stephen Wilford, who disrupted the mass murder in his small town's First Baptist Church in Texas, speaks to the crowd of pro-gun demonstrators at the Virginia State Capitol Monday. You obviously can't see that picture, but I thought that was pretty cool, so I decided to share it with you. The measure is set for a final vote in the Senate before going to the House. Republicans, they're not any better here, even if they are on the right side, blasted the bill as an assault on gun rights and civil liberties, which they are correct. DemoCRIPS said the bill was a thoughtful measure that would preserve due process while also protecting people against gun violence. And of course, they would, because they have absolutely no concept of liberty whatsoever. Of course, the moron AOC said that lack of police and riot gear at Virginia gun rights rally was racist. We can all see how quickly things would escalate to violence if she was in charge. DemoCRIPS, reject bills to further relax gun laws. So yeah, nothing good is coming out of this. And I used to be saying that I thought violence was going to first pop off in Oregon. It may actually be Virginia. So who knows? We'll see what happens. But there's a few things I want to talk about here quickly. So let's get to that. World ecumenical and evangelical leaders, Pope Francis urged U.S. and Iran to wind down conflict. I'm going to put this in the link in the description for you guys, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. Iran had on January 11th admitted that it unintentionally shot down a Ukraine passenger jet, killing all 176 people on board. On January 3rd, the Geneva-based World Council of Churches urged maximum restraint following the U.S. airstrike that killed General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's most prominent military commander at Baghdad airport in Iraq. Then in the aftermath of armed attacks by both the U.S. and Iran, the WCC, whose members' churches include 500 million, mainly Anglican, Orthodox, and Protestant Christians, reiterated its call on January 8th for restraint and de-escalation. Now, why is this important? Because, well, there's a few things. The first thing is, you can see Pope Francis, world ecumenical and evangelical leaders. Notice they're all coming together, right? This is something we've been talking about constantly, over and over and over and over and over again on the Watchdog. These people are going to continue to come together. In fact, the name Watchdog, what are we watching? We're watching this, right? They are going to continue to unite. And when they unite, they're going to be uniting over just causes like no more war and climate change and all this other kind of stuff. But in reality, it is just going to be a way to establish a very powerful religious United Nations, which Shimon Peres, former president, now deceased, of Israel, and Pope Francis, current pope of the Catholic Church, of course, have blatantly said they want to accomplish. And of course, I've pointed out numerous times, who do you think is going to lead that? Do you think it's going to be anybody other than Pope Francis, the guy who claims he's literally in place of God, right? And this isn't the only thing that we have here. Pope Francis, in a Christian message, has said the church must adapt to a post-Christian West. Now, what does he mean by adapt to a post-Christian West? The Catholic Church must adopt new approaches to evangelization in a post-Christian West, Pope Francis said in a Christmas message to Vatican officials. We need other maps, other paradigms that might help us change our ways of thinking. We are not in Christianity. Not anymore, end quote, the Pope said Saturday. Isn't that an interesting thing for him to say? We are no longer under a Christian regime because the faith, especially in Europe, but also in much of the West, no longer constitutes an obvious premise of common life. On the contrary, it is often denied, derided, marginalized, and ridiculed, end quote. The Pope's remarks echoed those of his predecessor, St. John Paul II, and Pope Benedict, I think that's 16th? Yeah, Pope Benedict XVI, who spoke of new evangelization to revive the faith in historically Christian lands. Pope Benedict established the office explicitly dedicated to this task. Those popes stressed the need to clarify and reaffirm traditional teachings in response to liberalizing tendencies in the church and wider society. By contrast, Francis, the Grand Blasphemous himself, has tended to play down such teachings and focus on social causes, such as economic inequality, the rights of migrants, and efforts to counteract global warming. Notice what all of those things are. They're global problems. They're problems that the left and people who are not necessarily religious are down with. They're problems that world ecumenical and evangelical leaders have spoken about in the past. Isn't that interesting? It's almost like they're converging and agreeing with each other on the same globally relevant issues. Almost like they'd like to spread their own power. And of course, this is something that we pointed out constantly over and over and over again in regards to Pope Francis and the World Council of Churches. But now we have this evangelical movement of a lot of actual, evangelical Protestants from the United States and elsewhere who are getting interested in this as well. They used to not actually be so interested in this sorts of thing. IFB and SPC and people like that tended to not actually be interested in ecumenism or anything like that. But here we go. Now we're here, right? And it's something that is honestly, it's getting very, 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 man, I have way too itchy of a nose right now. I'm sorry, I scratched my nose like 8 times, getting my mustache hairs in it. Anyways, they are way too open with it, and we have way too many people who are accepting it, who are just completely okay with it. Yeah, I'm down to have a global body of religious leaders led by a dude who claims he's in place of the living God, controlling things like, or debating things, or having sway over things, like whether or not I'm going to have cows or fly planes. As we've seen in the Green New Deal, AOC wants to control those sorts of things, right? Because that's combating climate change. Or whether or not I get to have borders, because that's combating the migrant crises or whatever. Or whether or not I get to own my own property and income, because that's combating income inequality, right? This is not in any way, shape, or form a positive thing. It is a very dangerous and evil thing, dare I say, an antichrist-like thing. New World Order, Illuminati type thing, right? This is very, very dangerous. And people need to be informed of it. And you know what? Honestly, we'll probably talk more about that on next week's episode of The Watchdog, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Real briefly, I do want to go over some things here. Scientists introduced living robots created by supercomputer. These millimeter-wide robots can move toward a target, perhaps pick up a payload like a medicine that needs to be carried to a specific place inside a patient, and heal themselves after being cut, according to the university. This is the University of Vermont who created these so-called xenobots. Now, the reason I find this interesting is because this is actually something that Stephen Banoon of Israeli News Live used to talk about. This idea that they would start creating organic robots, for lack of a better term, in order to advance medical technology, and that it could be potentially a way to implement like a mark of the beast or microchips or things like that. Last thing, and this one we'll go a little bit more in depth in, California textbook goes beyond too far. Remember, we were talking about that British textbook that was sexualizing children and all that kind of stuff? Well, guess what? Right here in our own backyard, it's happening as well. The textbook allegedly contains a chapter on anal sex and vampiric sexual practices known as blood play. The LGBT sex education curriculum has become increasingly normalized in more progressive school districts. According to the Facebook post from Informed Parents of Washington, the book called Sex was originally on the California school's suggested reading list for the kids in 9th to 12th grade. Following a massive public outcry, it was removed. Okay, sounds off here. But those responsible for adding it to the public education teaching material continue to remain and will only eventually push its acceptance at a later date. And we have videos here from Alex Jones. I definitely recommend watching them. They are phenomenal, but I am out of time. So, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this, please do like and share. We're going to have all of our links in the comment section below. Questions, comments, criticisms, or concerns, you can definitely leave, we're going to leave the articles in the description below, but questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, you can leave in the comment section there below. If you enjoy our content consistently, please do subscribe here to the TheCynicogue. We have once a weekday a new show here, the Watchdog. We also have once every weekend a Unapologetics, as well as we try to get an Unapologetics Lite, which is just a slightly smaller Unapologetics, which is Christian Apologetics. So if you're interested in either of those or both, please do subscribe. We certainly appreciate it. Links to all of our social media will be in the description as well. That is the TheCynicogue on BitChute, the TheCynicogue on Minds, ACP Official on Gab, the American Cynic Party on Facebook, Cynic Thought on Instagram, and Terrestrial Earthbird on Twitter. Thank you guys very much. You're always a great audience, and have a good rest of your day.